Good evening. This is Pastor Henry Sanders with Faith Outreach Christian Center. This is Thoughts from the Shepherd's Heart. We come to you today just wanting to share with you the things that God has shared with us and things out of the Word, trying to help you in your walk with God. I've been doing a series here. It's been an ongoing series about things we've learned along the way. And we've talked about a lot of different subjects. And this one we're on now is things we learned about the dynamics of the subjects that are most impressive or important to our walk with God. The love of God, mercy and grace and faith and forgiveness. And we're talking about humility last week, and we're going to talk some more today about humility. Humility is it's kind of like the doorway into the heart of God. Okay, you can't come in prideful. You can't come in knowing it all. You can't come in demanding your way. How you get into the presence of God is you come in and you humble yourself, just like a servant person will come into the king's presence. You know, he don't come in and say, "I want to tell you, King, what you." No, he comes in and he bows and he honors. And so that being said, this is an important mindset for us to understand. For us to get anywhere with God and anywhere in the world with relationships, humility is the key. Because if you lower yourself, if you humble yourself, God says He will exalt you in due season. You've been around people that's just braggadocious and that's all they do, and you get fed up with it pretty quick, you know. And I'm going to tell you, it requires us to have to kind of die to ourselves, because there's sometimes because we want people to know what we've done and where we've been and what we've accomplished, we have a tendency of sharing of putting those things out there. And you know, you're so much further along if somebody asks you something, because then they're asking you to reveal something rather than you offering it, throwing it out there and boring people with what probably they don't even care about. It's important, especially in your marriage, that you live a life of humility. Fussing, fighting, arguing, you know, divorce courts are full of people that are just prideful. You hurt my feelings. You said something I didn't like. You did something I didn't like, you know. And rather than being humble about it, you get right in somebody's face. After a while, those little fluffy feelings we have about loving one another begins to dissipate, and then we're enduring each other, and then we're not wanting to be around each other, and we're sitting in divorce court, because it could have been all handled if we would have just buried pride, said, "Hey, I'm sorry, forgive me," and just humble yourself. Now, that being said, let's look at what said Paul. Paul has a lot to say about humility. He said he has a lot to say. Fact is, most all of the things about humbling yourself, Paul makes those statements. Listen to what he says in Ephesians chapter 4. We talked about this in Philippians 2 last week, but listen to Ephesians 4. He says, "I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation where you are called." He says, walk worthy of the calling that God has put on your life. Now, you say, "Well, I don't have a calling." Yes, you do. You have a calling to be like Christ. You have a calling to submit yourself. You have a calling to humble yourself, that people can see Christ in you rather than seeing you. They need to see Christ. Now, listen to what it says. "With all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another." Did you get that? With all lowliness. That means lowering yourself, being meek, having patience, long suffering with people, forbearing one another in love. I promise you, if you just take chapter 4, verse 2 of Ephesians and apply that in your life, it'll transform your relationships. You lower yourself in humility. You're meek with people. You're long-suffering and patient with people. You're forbearing with them. You're loving them the way God loves you. You're being kind and compassionate. Verse 3 says this, endeavoring, that means work at this, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. You can change the atmosphere of your family. You can change it by walking in, being critical, finding fault with everybody, telling people what they need to do. Or you can walk in and begin to lay a foundation of peace. Speak kind words. And how you do that? You lower yourself down. You get off of your high horse. You get off of the dominating, dictating, and you humble yourself. And if you will, they'll open up their ears to listen. If all you're going to do is scream and holler, they're just going to turn you off like a television. Okay? But people take notice to kindness, respect, honor, and humility. So endeavor to keep the spirit of unity. That's what you have to do. I know I'm saying a lot about marriages, but that's a lot of time where some of the greatest conflicts are. Endeavor to keep the spirit of unity. It doesn't have to be your way. I know Naomi and I will be talking about things, and she's going to do something, and I said, why don't you do this? She says, well, I think I'd rather do this. I said, but you can do better if you do this. And then it'll hit me. Be quiet. Let her do what she wants to do the way she wants to do it. Now, that kind of rubs the grain in some of us when we have to sort of step back and find out that we might not know it all. They have a way. The whole thing is get the job done. Do whatever needs to be done, but do it where there's peace and joy, and that comes when we humble ourselves to one another. Listen to this. Endeavoring to keep the unity. Endeavor to keep peace. Endeavoring to keep that unity of by being together in the bond of peace. Colossians chapter 3 has something else here. I'm going to start up here where it talks about in verse 8. It says, but now we also put off these things. So this is what we're to do. If we're trying to accomplish things in relationships, you put off anger and wrath and malice and blaspheming and filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another. You know, when you lie, all it is that the pride in you will not humble itself. If you learn to just quickly admit to the wrong, God can rescue you. Okay? He says, if you humble yourself, he can exalt you. So lie not one to another, seeing that you have put off the old man with the seed. In other words, if you're a believer, you have asked God to forgive you of that old life, and you have asked God to help you not to be angry and wrathful and malicious and blaspheming and have filthy communications or lying. You don't want to do that thing. It says, so you have put off the old man and you have put on a new man. You have put on a new person. There's a new person living inside of me. That old person has died. That old person is buried. That old person is gone. Now he tries to come back. He comes back when there's pride involved. Pride raises the old man to do what he wants, okay? But it goes on to say this. It says that that you put on the new man, which is renewed in the knowledge after the image of him that created him. We were created and made in the image of God. Wherefore, there is neither Greek, nor Jew, nor circumcision, nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond or free, but Christ is all and in all. It's all about Jesus. How would you treat Jesus? If we could just get the comprehension in our mind, I'm going to treat this person as though they were Jesus. I'm going to honor them, love them. I'm going to give them respect. I'm going to take time for them. I'm going to be kind to them. You see, we see Jesus up here, and they're down here, and Jesus says, do you love me? Oh, yes, I love you, Jesus. He said, well, show me how much you love me. And we're saying, well, I'm talking to you, I'm praying, and I give my money to you. This. He said, no, you don't have it yet. You don't understand. The way you show me you love me is to love them. For as much as you have showed mercy to them, you showed it to me. You show kindness to them, you show it to me. That's why he says, love one another as I've loved you. And he goes on, listen, he says, put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on bowels of mercy. Be merciful to people. Don't be so quick to judge them and throw them under the bus. Be kind to them. It says kindness, humbleness of mind. Humbleness of mind means I step down in my mind from being the ruler, controller, dominator, and I become the servant. Jesus, it says this in Philippians, he said, he thought it not robbery to be equal with God the Father, but he humbled himself and took upon him the form of a servant. And we see that demonstrated when he's washing the disciples' feet. Grasp this in your mind. God is washing the creature's feet. That's called humility. And then he tells us, do this to one another. Lower yourself. Love and respect them. He said, put on the bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another and forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also forgive them. Now, there's a verse over in James that has always stood out to me. He says this, God resists the proud. Did you get that? Do you want God to stiff arm you? Do you want him to resist you? When you come to the throne, do you want him to hold you off? God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. I remember years ago I preached a message about how to turn on the valve of grace. You know, I pictured it like a big old tank up here. And there's a valve right here. And it's all this grace. And how do I get the grace of restoration, the grace of love? How do I get the grace of God to flow? He said, turn the valve of humility, humbleness, and grace comes forth. Let me give you an example. Husband and wife got a conflict going on, and they're not talking to each other. Well, obviously, somebody has got to humble themselves. Somebody's got to go in there and say, can we talk? Or if you don't, go to the divorce court because it's going to end there. No. So for that to happen, you got to go in and say, can we talk? Can we humble ourselves? And when you do that, you have turned the valve of restoration, grace of restoration, because you have humbled yourself to try to bring the unity and the spirit of the bond of peace in here. So it's only when it's going to be your way or the highway, and that is the expression of pride. Now, the other thing, he says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Verse 7 says this. This is James chapter 4, verse 6 to 7. Submit yourself, therefore, to God. That word submit means to humble and surrender and bow and honor and respect to God. Submit yourself, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. But the devil will never flee from you if you are not humbling yourself to God. Because the devil will say this to you in his... I'm sorry for the little glitch we had on our YouTube right then, but we're going to finish this. If the devil sees that you are not being obedient to your authority, he won't obey you. Because he can only come under the command of someone that's under command. So that's why humility is such an important thing, because it's part of our submission to God. We bow our hearts, we bow our heads, so to speak, we bow our lives, we submit ourselves to God. And he said, if you submit yourself to God, you can resist the devil and he will flee from you. You know, Romans chapter 12 tells us something else. It says, be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another. So I'm going to conclude that today, and the fact that the way we humble ourselves to others is we prefer them. We put them before ourselves. We don't just do what we do and disregard everybody else or disrespect everybody else. We do what we do because we love God and we love them, and we demonstrate that with a heart of humility. Not pride. Pride is the destructive force. Humility is that which restores. And may God bless you today as you walk in humility. In Jesus' name.